Greetings and thank you for downloading the Superb Diamond Range podcast. This is episode 34. I'm your host Superb, broadcasting from Edinburgh. This episode is going to be about paying bills, and it's part of a new series I'm making on finances. First of all, I want to start off with, what influenced me to start making this series of podcasts on finances. Over the years, I've always been reading a lot of finance books and watching videos on YouTube of the likes of Robert Kiyasaki from Rich Dad, also David Bach, the Automatic Millionaire, as well as listening to podcasts by Ramsey and reading many of his books as well. So this episode is for people paying their bills and just some ideas and advice that can be taken or not, completely depending on your personal situation. So when it comes to bills, obviously the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get your pay deposited into your bank account. Now, I'd say most companies, definitely within the UK and maybe around the world nowadays, seem to pay directly into a bank account. But there could be some companies out there that still pay by check. And obviously when you get a check, there's a bit of time to, bring it down to the bank, deposit it. You'll have to wait a certain amount of time for it to clear, maybe 4 to 5 working days. So you're kind of losing out on the opportunity to be putting your money to work. So I would always recommend, if your company offers it, to make sure that you get direct deposit. So every month, or if you get paid weekly, your money is deposited straight to your bank account, so that immediately you can gain control of what's coming in, what's going out. One of the other things I'd have to recommend, and there are still a few people that are late to this, but I really do strongly recommend it, is getting online banking. Online banking is such a great thing. It allows you to keep on top of things, to see what's happening with your account. I know there's many people that, fear for the security and so on and so forth, but really it's worth doing more research on that, because it is very secure and it's a good way to kind of track and keep an eye on what's going on in your account in terms of, expenses, and obviously you can check how much you're spending as well. So yeah, obviously signing up for online banking and maybe downloading an app on your phone for convenience, or just going on your home computer to do it. So that would be the best way forward with that. Once you've got that all set up, obviously when you get paid, there'll be a time when you get paid. So if you're weekly paid, it might be every Friday. If you're monthly paid, it could be beginning of the month, it could be towards the end of the month, so the 29th, 28th, 26th. So be aware of your pay date, obviously. So that's very important, because that's kind of a time when the money's coming in and you've got to sort of direct it where you want it to go. Now, I'll get into this later on about things like budgeting, but this episode is more to do with strategies and techniques of, handling your money when it comes in. And again, there's another tip I'll give. Before paying any of your bills, the most important thing is to pay yourself first. Now, I am going to follow up on this with another video specifically on paying yourself first and what it means. So I won't get too into it on this podcast, but that will be a future episode where I'll focus on that. But obviously that's just setting a certain amount of money aside, whether to save or to invest or to do something, and that's an agreement you have with yourself. So that's the most important thing. Before anything else gets paid, the most important person to pay is yourself. So you're more important than any other bill, council tax, gas, electric, rent even, or mortgage. So yeah, I'll get into that in another podcast, but just remember to do things in this order. So we've established you've got a payday. In this example, we'll just use the beginning of the month, say the first of the month. So you get paid in the first of each month, and obviously you want to set up that your bills come out shortly after. So, if you're really confident you always get paid exactly on the first, you could almost set them up to go out on the same day. If you want to be a bit more safer to avoid possibly going overdrawn, You could look at, obviously, making it a couple of days after or a day later, so the 2nd or 3rd, for example. And I like to set all the bills up so that they ideally come out at the same time rather than scattered or spread. Partly why I like doing this is because once the bills are gone, they're gone. It won't be like there's money sitting there that you spend and then you realize, oh no, I can't pay my bill that's in the middle of the month or the end of the month or 3/4 of the way through. So it's kind of more like efficient to get them all around the same time. Now, obviously, I know it's not always easy to negotiate this, because you will get companies that say we can only do certain dates. So you obviously have to try and negotiate with the companies and see if they'll accommodate you. You could always mention that you get paid on that date and it's more convenient, more easy, and see if they'll, so at least if you could get majority of your bills around the same date, that will help a lot. And it just means that you won't spend the money. It'll be, your bills will get paid when the money's there and available to pay them. Obviously, you've got to make sure that your bills are, you can obviously comfortably afford your bills as well, and that you have enough money. But I'll get into that later in the episode about, getting your bills as low as possible. So yeah, it's got to be, like I said, bank transfer. It's got to be direct deposit to make it automatic. And the other thing is the method that you choose to pay your bills. Now in the UK, and I'm pretty sure in the likes of US, you may have heard of a thing called direct debit. This is where you sort of hand over control of your money to the bank, and they'll collect it on a certain day. And with a direct debit, basically you're handing over the keys to your account, so they can, they're supposed to give you notice and make sure that they tell you what amounts they're going to take. But I've had experience over the years with the likes of British Telecom for my phone line, where they've, taken a lot more than they've said they would. And this can happen also with electricity and gas companies. So I've always felt it's important to have control over your payment method. And the one that I really like, but it's very hard nowadays because some companies don't like you doing it, is to try to set up a standing order. So that basically means you have the control. So you set up the date you want to pay them, and you set up the amount, and you just get the company's, bank details, sort code and account number. And then you have the control then, and you can tell them how much you want to send. And there's no surprises. There's no, oh no, I can't believe they've taken hundreds out of my account. They're only supposed to take £10. You always have the knowledge of what's coming out, because you've set the amounts, and it just puts you in the control position versus being at the mercy of the bill company or the bank. And sometimes direct debits as well can, if they fail, it can lead to charges and fees and penalties. So obviously that's going to affect the amount of money you have. So you don't really want to be hit by these penalties, or you don't want to go overdrawn over your account unauthorized, because obviously it's going to it's going to be a domino effect on your finances. So ideally you want to pay standing order. If you can't and it's direct debit, there are options where you can pay money towards the bill, maybe by your card and things like that, to ensure that there is no surprises. But ultimately I would recommend standing order if you get the opportunity to do it, or just a sort of like a one-off payment from your bank account, so like a bank transfer where you set up the payees in your account and you transfer the money. So that's how I would handle it. I don't recommend giving card details out, in particular debit or credit card details, where you get like a recurring payment. So this could be like for subscriptions, say you're subscribed to a magazine. It might even be a phone contract where they basically take a recurring payment. And with the recurring payments, you never know when they're going to strike, when they're going to take the money. And sometimes you don't know how much. And sometimes your account could be quite low. And the recurring payment, because you don't see it in your list of bills, you can't determine when they're going to take it or when it happens. So it's almost like you forget that you've got that bill. So I think that it's important to not do recurring payments, because obviously you want to be able to see the bills going out of your account, have knowledge of the dates that they come out and the amounts, and that's good for your own knowledge. Was going to move on to if people have credit card bills, so they might use their credit card at certain times of the month. Again, I am going to talk about credit cards in a later episode, but I always say that obviously you've got your bill date of your credit card, and then you've got your due date, you've got the grace period and so on and so forth. But I would say if you were planning to use a credit card, that you would aim to pay it off in full every month, and ideally before the statement date. I would zero it out then. And obviously another way to do this, you can again set up a direct debit for things like minimum payment or pay in full. What I recommend is just making manual payments and making them as early as possible, because you don't want to get, again, what we talked about earlier, charges, late fees and so on. So if you could, log into your online banking version of your credit card and maybe just see when the usual statement date is, or even the due date if you really want to sort of run it close. But ideally I would advise up to 2 weeks early if you can. There is a way to set this up as well. I've spoken about this before, and again, when I do the credit card episode, it'll be more clear. But I've known of people that have a billing date of the 5th of the month, and that means that if they didn't pay their bill in full and they carried a balance past the 5th of the month, the due date would be towards the end of the month. So if it was the 5th of February, the billing date, they would have until around about the end of February to pay what was due. And of course, if you knew you were getting paid at the end of the month, you would then have the money to clear it. So it's a good, because basically everyone has a different billing date, and you can actually ring your credit card company up and change the billing date. So I would advise that, to pick around about, again, if you get paid towards the end of the month, the 5th is a good date, but you may get paid in the middle of the month. So then you'd have to work out, say 3 weeks after your billing date, what date it would be. So this just means that you have the money ready to clear it, so you don't, again, void penalties and fees and interest, which is, main thing. You don't want to pay any interest. You can obviously set up as well savings. So if you have a savings account, again, this goes back to pay yourself first, but if you have savings accounts, you could set them up as payees and just, either manually pay them when you get paid, or do an automatic payment, which is, you won't even notice that you're doing it almost. So that's pretty good. I don't really recommend getting an overdraft, and I am going to talk about overdraft again later on in the series, but what I personally would recommend is creating a kind of cash buffer in your bank account or current account, or checking account as they call it in America. So like the buffer would ideally be 1 month's worth of expenses. If you couldn't quite put in a month, you could build it up over time. So you could say start off with a £200 buffer, £100 buffer, and then month on month just try to increase it so that you have at least a month's expenses, so that your account has always got money there, and then there's no chance of you going unauthorized overdrawn and being charged, or if you have a overdraft, being charged to use it, because you can literally dig yourself into a hole. But again, that will be talked about in later episodes. The other thing that I always talk to people about is, you've got to try to aim at lowering all your expenses. I call it aiming to be lean. And, the first step is obviously seeing if you've got the best deal. So if you've got a phone, maybe look at, if the contract's up for renewal, negotiating with the existing phone provider to get the best deal and cheapest deal. I'm not really a fan of getting a new phone. I personally think that either pay as you go, or if not, a SIM-only contract if you do have to go down the contract road. And obviously making sure that it's a really good deal and it's as cheap as pay-as-you-go and you get a good deal for it. So obviously your first port of call is to contact your existing companies and try to, work out a good deal. And, you can talk about how loyal you are and how you enjoy using them and that you're thinking about maybe joining another company that's offering a better deal. So that would be a really important thing to do. And the other thing is you've got a lot of websites now for switching, so you can switch your insurance for various things. If you've got car insurance or home insurance, contents insurance, you can switch all these things. And one of the big ones I always recommend to people is the gas and electric. If you think that your bills are a bit high, again, you can start looking at other companies, see how much they charge and see if you can get a better deal for your usage. Some people may say that you won't save much money and it'll be the same, that they're all the same, but until you switch, you never know. I mean, there are people that have stayed with one company for years or forever and they could be missing out on some really great deals. So the most important thing is that you keep everything in order and you have everything written down and you get to know the amounts that you're paying and obviously work this out with how much you get paid. And there's a great app over in America that Dave Ramsey is behind, and it's called Every Dollar, and it's an app that you can download or you can visit the web page, and it allows you to create an online budget for month and each month basically. And it's really good because it puts everything into categories and percentages, so you can see how much percentage you're paying for housing, say rent or mortgage, how much percent you're paying for debt, how much percent your insurances are and things like that. And obviously there are other things you can use like Microsoft programs that PowerPoint and things like that you can Excel, things like that you can use. So that's another way to kind of get an idea of how much money you're getting and how much is going out in bills. And obviously aim to be as lean as possible. Obviously if there's things that you really like, so for example you might really like the internet and you've had experience with poor quality companies that have been really bad service, and you've learned maybe that by paying cheap that you haven't got such a great service. So obviously you would then look to get a better company that did a better quality job, and if you believed in it was worth how much they were charging and you're happy to pay it, that's a completely different thing. But if it's something that you're not too bothered about, like I always say, things like phone and broadband, you want to get good value for money, but you also want a good service. So sometimes you have to weigh up if it's worth paying a little bit extra, if it's going to give you a good service. I can give you an example of this case. You might be with a certain phone network. I won't mention any names, but you found that you get good signal where you live. And then you find another provider offers a really cheap deal. And it's really tempting. It's like half the price what you're paying at the moment. And of course you get the deal, and then you get the SIM card and you get home and you realize the signal's very poor. You keep dropping calls. It's just not suited to your area where you live. So you kind of regret switching to this other company. And the same can go with broadband. You could have a company that you think is charging too much, but it's really good. And then you find one that's cheaper that doesn't offer such a good service. So therefore you'd be looking at, you'd be unhappy with it. You'd think, oh no, I regret this. So quality is important, and trying to strike the best deal. Sometimes loyalty pays. Sometimes being a new customer, you can get a better deal. But it's always good to negotiate and talk first. And I always say you can speak to kind of bottom level call center, but a lot of the time they'll probably fob you off and say that we cannot offer you a better deal. But you can always say, can I speak to a level 2, maybe your manager, and just explain, that you want to stay loyal and you want to keep their business. And a lot of companies want to keep your business. You could be having a subscription with the likes of Audible or Netflix, and you could say you're thinking of leaving, and they could turn around to you and say, if you stay, we'll offer you half price for 6 months. Now, I know it's only 6 months, but it's still a saving, and it's either you could still just cancel it if you really don't want it anymore, or you could keep it and you'll save money. And any savings you make, you can always invest the difference, save the difference, use it towards buying something that you really like. In this particular episode, I'm not really going to talk about percentages and so on and so forth. But, later on we'll get into that, and that, is something pretty important. Another thing I need to mention is if your workplace offers any PAYE, pay as you earn, charity giving options, that you could do that through your pay, so it becomes automatic. If not, you could always, join up to a charity and make donations. But if you do it before tax and national insurance, you will be able to send more towards them. So that's another thing you can do. And obviously you can just help family and friends as well. Just do the right thing for them. So I think this is going to be pretty much it for this episode. It was just really to give you an idea of how to go about managing your bills, and obviously getting your bills as lean as possible, and negotiating with the companies and using switching sites to get the best deal. Obviously trying to aim to have at least 1 month's expenses in your account as a buffer rather than an overdraft, because it's not good to get into debt unnecessarily. If you can keep in credit, then that's much better. Because you don't want to be paying these fees to these banks and being short every month. And it could involve having a long, hard look at your finances and your budget and the way you're spending money. And we've all done it. I've done it. I've gone out and wasted lots of money on different things, and you kind of learn over time that you need to kind of optimize and adjust. So we're all kind of guilty of it, and some people are really good at it. Some people know exactly what they're doing. And that's why, I will talk about different types of debt in later episodes, but obviously I want to say that, there's always a risk involved when you get into debt, and you could have a brilliant plan how to pay the debt back, but then life can happen to you. So you've kind of got to be really set up well and in good position. And, if you're happy to pay interest, then fair enough. But I think it's as important to avoid it as much as possible, because it will affect your future, your profit, I guess, if you treat yourself almost like a company. You want to be coming forward, not going backwards, and nobody likes getting paid and whatever money you've got left going towards bills or debt. So you kind of want to make sure you have something for yourself, for your future. So that's pretty much it for this episode. I'm sure there's many things that I've forgot to mention, but I'm sure I will in later episodes. So anyway, thank you very much for listening to the Superb Diamond Range podcast. It's the financial series. Appreciate you listening. Be really grateful if you could recommend it to your friends and family if you've enjoyed listening, and I hope you continue to listen to this series. If you like the podcast, it'd be great for you to leave a review for me on iTunes. That'd be superb. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.